Hello, everyone. Today is Tuesday, April 9th, 2024. This is a meeting of the SIG Network Policy API subgroup to SIG Network. This is a CNCF-sponsored meeting, so please follow their code of conduct, which basically boils down to let's be nice to each other. So yeah, let's have a good meeting today. I'm going to hop over to the agenda. Okay, cool. So as I mentioned before, just heads up, I do have to drop about halfway through this meeting for conflict, but Suri's going to take over if we're still chatting. So just be on the lookout for that. Hopping right into it. I know that I've seen some comments going on the FQD NPEP. Let me pull that up, and I'll also link this agenda for folks. Okay, cool. So for this one, I think Sean, you had a couple pretty interesting questions. Do you kind of want to kick us off? And we have Raul here. So I think we could run
Yeah,
through
sure.
some of those.
Sure. I only just took a first look at the FQDN proposal just before the meeting. I basically just compared it to what we've already implemented in Calico. It's in our enterprise version, but I don't think that makes any difference to the feedback. We've had that feature out for quite a while, and it's been very popular and works well for folks. I I just looked at the patterns and they're slightly different from what we have in our implementation. I think when we looked at it, we saw the need, with the definite need for wildcards. People use wildcards a lot to cover, www and like different kind of prefixes on their domains and that sort of stuff. So I think wildcards. I don't think you could really have a good version of the feature without some kind of wildcard. So unless there's an implementation that really struggles with that, then I would say just have a pattern that allows wildcards. Our wildcard implementation, we limited it to one wildcard section. I talked to the engineer who implemented it, and the main reason for that was just limiting what we support, because we couldn't see any requirement for anything more than that. I don't think there was any massive technical reason that we couldn't support more than one wildcard, or even support a kind of regex type match with the way we actually ended up implementing it. But it wasn't needed, and no one's really come back to us. This feature's been out with our enterprise customers for a long time, and no one's really come back and said, oh, can you have two wildcards, or can I match partial fragments of things? So if folks can live with our limitation, then that would obviously make it easier for us to implement the feature, because we could just map it straight onto what we have without doing any changes under the hood. On the other hand, I don't think there's any fundamental reasons that we can't implement anything slightly more wild in the wildcards. But yeah, that's our experience. It's been fine just with the single asterisk. And yeah, we only implemented the combined pattern and kind of full match, and that comes out nicer in the API for sure.
Sweet, that's really good feedback. Nadia, I'll toss it over to you. You have your hand raised.
Yeah, that is actually a great feedback. And I think we're moving in a similar direction in our discussion in the NPEP. But there is one thing that I'm not sure I understand how it's supposed to work in your implementation, where you have asterisks basically in any part of the DNS name. So basically when you say Google dot wildcard, and then you can match anything, that doesn't seem very secure, right? Because from the FQDN point of view, when you put a wildcard, you're kind of expressing the trust to the DNS domain owner for like 1, 2, or 3 labels to whatever you want. But then when you put it somewhere in between, I can create a domain that matches Google dot something, right? And then I'm not sure why would you put a rule like that in your security policy, really.
I'm not sure we had a use case for putting it at the end. I think, I mean, maybe it's the trying to capture, google.com, google.co.uk, google.net, google.io, all those different things. I mean, that's probably why we put it in. I'm not sure we really thought about the security implications of trust in that way. Yeah, it kind of depends what you're using it for and what you expect your workloads to do, I suppose. But yeah, I think you're probably right. There is an implication there. You don't want to have www.google.somescarydomain.com. That probably doesn't make a lot of sense.
Yeah, that's my only concern. Other than that, I think it matches where we are going right now. We also had a discussion about if wildcard should only match one label or like any amount of labels in the FQDN. I think we kind of decided to go with one for now and then expand if needed, but we can reconsider that maybe.
I think in our implementation, we went with any number of segments. So I suppose if we were to if the Kubernetes one solidified it around a single a single segment, we'd have to have some way to map that into our policy to make sure we didn't match more than one in order to be compliant.
Or if you have some nice use case where someone wants to match more than one label, that could be a nice addition to the NPAP so that we can use it as a use case and then just design for it.
Yeah, especially +1 to the use case side of things, because I think Cilium does the opposite, if I recall correctly, where they only match a single subdomain. They don't do a stretch. So no matter what, I think somebody has to put an adapter in front of it, right? So at that point, if we can justify this based on use cases, then at least we have a good reason why we're where we are. And then I hope people will be more willing to go through that translation layer.
Yeah, I don't think there was any kind of like major reason. Well, we only allow one asterisk, so that was a reason in our case to match
Right.
multiple. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to do it at all. I think it gets quite awkward if you want to match a single. If you want to match multiple, you would end up having to do star dot star, star dot star dot star, and so on. And we thought that looked a bit messy and required multiple matches to achieve the same thing. But I think that level of detail was just a kind of aesthetic choice when we were designing the API of just, well, we thought that would be good.
Yeah, it makes sense. Yeah, I think Andrew pulled up the discussion that we had. I think it ended up being a coin flip for us. We just said, no, we'll pick one for now and see if we get any massive pushback. Yeah, Nadia, do you have any thoughts what we should do?
Not about what we should do, but if we want to allow to match more than one label, I would definitely prefer just one asterisk compared to star dot something else. And I was even consulted with some of our internal DNS team, then they gave me a nice reference to some cool docs saying that it probably would be better to do that. But I think we can figure out a use case for just multiple labels match. But I think it makes sense. So if we could just maybe write something like that down.
My
If
thought
we're-
too is we could always start with one and expand in the future. Like I really think we don't want to block. It's like we want to get to the point where we can incrementally still move forward, right? So this is still a V1 Alpha 1 API. Like if we merge it and we can only match one label, and then Sean has an amazing use case that warrants having more, like open another really tiny NPEP for just that, and it'll move a lot quicker than this big one, right? I think that's totally fine. Like getting more iterative, allowing the community to move quicker with new use cases is good. We've done an all right job, but we've still moved pretty slow with all these, and I think we're learning that the smaller bites we do, the quicker we'll move. So that's just my thought on it right now.
I think the only slightly awkward thing from my point of view is if you use asterisk for a single thing, and we've already used asterisk for multiple, we have this awkward mapping where maybe we have to map asterisk to something else, and then like when you add the multiple, we have to map that to our asterisk, which should kind of come out a little bit confusing if you sort of use the, but I don't know, is there another character that would work well for a single chunk if asterisk is the multiple one, or maybe other implementations already have asterisk to mean one, and like yeah, it's always awkward.
I know Tim Hawkin definitely cautioned me against using super custom selectors. I think he was like, he wanted to stick to well-known standards, like star is a wild card and don't get too fancy with selectors. I guess the other point in favor of only selecting one is it's more explicit. Like if we put our security hats on, it's better to say, I know exactly what I'm matching against, right? Rather than opening the door very wide. It's an argument. It's it's always a sliding window on how far you want to go.
Nadia?
Just a quick note. I think if we figure out in the end that it is important for someone if to be able to match more than one and to distinguish these two cases, so sometimes I want to match for just one label and sometimes for more than one, then we could potentially have an extra field to the wildcard DNS name saying allow matching multiple labels or something like that. But I think we definitely need to make sure these differences do make sense for someone. So use cases again.
It's I'm not a DNS expert. To me, it's what's the lesser of two evils. Is there some other special identifier that is more mainstream? I don't know. I am not a DNS expert again, so I'd have to ask folks on that.
You got the usual suspects, star and plus, and
Yeah,
underscore is probably legal in a domain, so we probably can't use that one. %.
yeah.
But I feel like star is pretty commonly used to match one level in the DNS context specifically.
Maybe just to wrap us up for the time being, we'll keep it at one the way it is. I realize that's a little bit of work for some implementations, but I mean, just in the interest of picking something and moving on.
Well, and also, I mean, this is an alpha API. They could just choose to be slightly non-conforming for their first release, and then we get feedback. Although, I guess ideally not, because then we get bad feedback.
If we know we're gonna get bad feedback, do we still do it?
I just meant bad feedback because, in that case, we wouldn't get customers, or we wouldn't get users using Calico saying that, like we would be getting incompatible feedback from Calico and non-Calico users. So, right.
Right. True. I understand. Yeah. Well, I'm thinking I'll let Nathan go ahead. Sorry, you've had your hand up for a minute.
Yeah, speaking for the Cilium policy team, I would like to agree with Calico and say I favor one asterisk as well. And that's actually how we do it as well. And if you want to match more, you just don't have a dot. So star Kubernetes IO.
But in Cilium today, does that mean multiple labels, or am I misunderstanding? Does that mean like if you did www.star, does that mean it selects almost everything, or it only selects the one following label?
Yes. So the dot does delineate, but we say you can only have one.
Okay.
I think it would actually work if you added another one though, based on my knowledge of how the engine works.
Okay. Nadia?
Yeah, just wanted to add that star something without the dot has similar like security implications, right? Because again, you don't express the trust in the domain owner. I can create Nadia Kubernetes dot something else and it will be allowed, and you have zero control over that. So I think for now we only expect asterisk to be matching something before the dot all the time. So I'm not sure if you'd agree with that.
I think if that limitation goes into the Kubernetes resource, then even if the implementation allows to have a star at the end, then it wouldn't be exposed. And I think you're probably right. It probably shouldn't be exposed. It's too tempting to think you can match the .com and .co.uk and stuff when actually it's a bad idea.
+1. Go ahead. So with your hand raised, I'm sorry.
Yeah, it's Guy. No problem. I'm sorry to jump in here, but I was wondering, there's actually an LFC for that, right? For the wildcards in host names. So I'm not an expert either, right? But I think it has something about a star that always has to match an entire label, but never a portion of a label. It also says in the RFC, if I'm not mistaken, something about it can match multiple labels, not only one. Anyway, just leaving here for the reference, the link.
I think I linked either exactly that or something very similar in the discussion. So it should be there somewhere.
Okay, cool.
Let's see if I can find that and put it in the agenda. I did click on that RFC. I mean, when in doubt, conform to an RFC. I'm not against doing that. if that can
It is
back us
marked
up a little
as
bit.
Resolved, Andrew. It's somewhere.
Oh
higher than that.
goodness.
Yeah.
Okay. It's probably not even worthwhile for me. Is anyone benefiting from me sharing my screen right now? It's probably not very worthwhile. So I'm gonna stop sharing.
But that link is there. I've
Okay.
just checked. So
Cool. I'll find it. I'm gonna throw it in the agenda. Oh, here it is.
So we only implement the full match of a piece of a domain name. Is label the right word for it? I was struggling to find the right word for it because I knew we were going to have to talk about it. But yeah, we don't allow a partial match. I don't think there's any like technical reason, but we just validate against it at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, I think we're serious saying labels is overloaded. Yeah, I'm getting a little mixed up on the terminology too. But can you, just for an example of what you said, like you always have to specify, if you want to specify google.com, it has to be, or www.star.com. Like you have to still, you can't just say www.star. You always have to specify every
No, it's
section.
the thing you can't do with Calico is you can't do www.gstar.com.
Okay. Yes.
You can do www.star.com, but you can't have the G in there, and that I think it's just an arbitrary limitation. I don't know if we were inspired by that RFC, but it sounds like what the RFC sounds like it has the same limitations, but I can't say that it was based on that.
Okay. That makes more sense. Thank you. So, Rahul, in terms of this issue specifically, I'm all right with moving forward what we've specified so far. If I know Sean is going to have some issues trying to map it to Calico, but do we want to? I guess the question boils down to like tackle it now or tackle it in the future. Sean, do you feel super strongly on one or the other at this moment?
I think it's just going to make it a little bit more awkward to map it. I'm sure we can come up with something, and it might just delay us doing it a bit longer, because the work's a little bit bigger. It's just one of those factors.
Yep.
Nothing like struck me as like, oh, we can't do this or anything like that. It's just,
Okay.
you know, for sake of argument, we could map the star to star question mark, which matches how regexes do that kind of thing.
Okay, cool. I think that makes the most sense right now, unless anyone else objects. Okay, cool. Rahul, are there any other big, or anyone, any other big to-dos on the FQDN? I know there were some open comments from Antonio, who's not here. Is there anything else that we want to talk about around FQDN at the moment?
Yeah, I think a couple ones down, Nadia brought up the other big one, which was basically right now we have 2 fields in the selector. We have a name and we have a pattern. And basically, I think the thinking was, if I recall correctly, we wanted to give implementations the flexibility to do exact matches without supporting patterns. And fields are sort of the ANP way of letting implementations pick what they do and don't support. I think we've gotten a lot of feedback saying that having 2 fields is confusing and perhaps unnecessary. Do we want to make at least for V1 Alpha 1 decision on, do you have to support stars, or do we want to still give people the flexibility to say, you know, I support exact matches but no stars, and I need a way to, you know, explain that in the API.
Dan?
I violently disagree with having optional functionality. If we don't think that everybody can support like the wildcards, we should just not offer wildcards.
But I think we have to offer wildcards. Like, I kind of agree with what Sean said earlier. Like, it's one of the most widely used things that's part of this feature.
Does
Also,
anyone have an implementation that can't support it, or?
Good question. Anyone? I mean,
If you don't support wildcards, you can, you know, try to do a simpler thing where you're not intercepting DNS requests. But you shouldn't do that, because when we were investigating this before, we found that everybody who tries to do it without investigating DNS requests has an implementation that doesn't work very well, and customers complain about it. So there may have been discussion about, oh, such and such cloud provider can't do this, or like, you know, if you're trying to implement it in terms of, you know, translating admin network policy into, you know, AFS security groups or AWS security groups. I don't know about that.
Well, for our main implementer CNIs, we do have somewhat of a quorum here. Finally, it's taken us a long time to get it, and I'm super excited. We have Calico, Cilium, Owen Kubernetes, and Antria. I don't know if Yang's here today. We have a good bit of quorum here. I think if there's no one here that says we can't do it, we can move forward saying that we can. If it's like a big point of confusion rule, I'm a +1 on removing the duplicate field. Does anyone else object with that? And if you want, Rahul, you can put in that comment, like, discussed in meeting, had quorum of, you know, 4 CNIs.
Yeah. Okay, we can strip it out. Does it make sense to just inline the pattern field essentially, or do we still want a sub message? Like right now, in the top level ANP, you say, you know, FQDN selector, and then you create an object, and then you say pattern : thing. If we inline it, we lose the ability to add other sub options later. But it makes the user experience nicer where you can just list out a bunch of patterns rather than having to, nest objects.
I don't think we totally lose the ability to, do we? The way we've designed the Go types. Like if we need to add a structure later, we still can, can't we?
Not in
think
a
we need to
backwards
make a new one.
compatible way.
Okay, fair enough.
I feel like we
Dan.
have enough third-party implementations of this feature that we ought to be able to make a good guess about whether we're going to need or want for the functionality in the future.
Well, we have just discussed that in case we want to distinguish this wildcard matching, right, for one label versus multiple labels, that could be a potential extra field to that.
I think I would just argue for having a different syntax, like, just use a different wildcard character or something if that's needed.
Makes sense.
We just have a list in our policy. Yeah, I don't think it's ever been an issue.
I don't really know the right way there, Rahul. I don't have a good answer personally. I mean, I think maybe looking at the other implementation and see what they have, because I think Dan has a good point. Like this feature has been soaking for a while. So
Yeah, all right. I'll just look through the other APIs, see what they're up to. I'm leaning towards just making it a list. It's already a complicated enough feature. The more knobs we add to it, the worse of a time everyone's gonna have, implementer and user. So
yeah, 100%.
If the list biases us in keeping things simple, that's probably a good thing for everyone.
I'm +1 to that. Okay, I have to hop out. I'm super sorry about that, y'all. Sorry, I made you a co-host, so if you could just keep us rolling, that'd be awesome.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, Nadia, I think you have your hand raised. Did you raise it now or was it before?
I just wanted to double check that we agreed to have one field instead of two, right?
Yeah, Rahul. I think
Yeah,
we
yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, I'm gonna say that we had a quorum of 3 or 4 CNIs. Everyone was okay implementing with wildcards, and so that's what we're gonna go with for now.
And I guess the same with making it inline, right? So we make it inline for now, keep it simple. And
Yeah.
if before we go to V1 in the beta phase or whatever, we think we want to expand it, it's okay if we do the backwards compatibility break. But given all the other APIs out there who still just have a simple list, I think for now we can go ahead with that.
Yep, exactly.
Awesome. Anything else we want to bring up on the FQD and NPEP before we move on to the next item?
Nothing major, I don't think. There's a few other comments, but I think we can handle those in the NPEP discussion.
Awesome. Yeah, when you have pushed the new update for the based on the changes we spoke about today, feel free to ping us on Slack. And everybody, please preview Rahul's NPEP so that we can try to get the first iteration merged. And thanks, Rahul, for sticking around with this.
No worries. Thank you so much, guys.
Yeah, let's move on. Sean, you have another item on the agenda, which is the service-based policy can give Calico experience. So go for it.
Yeah, so there was a discussion. I was just reading down the notes from the last few meetings. There was a discussion about service-based policy, I think, a few meetings ago. And Calico's had that for a while. We support allowing just having a rule where you give the name and namespace of the service. And I think we internally mapped that the implementation maps it to use the endpoints behind the service. So that has the limitation that, for example, a CNAME service can't be supported. But I think that's been quite a popular feature. It generally just kind of works how people intuitively think it should. Whenever they have pods talking to pods within the cluster, you give your service name and you get the ability to talk to the pods behind that service on the ports that they expose. So yeah, the UI has been relatively straightforward. It's just namespace, name, and service. We thought about doing labels, but it ended up being quite complicated from the implementation point of view, because you had to look up all the services by label, and then you had to combine them all, combine all the endpoints of the different services that matched, which was quite complex. And so we implemented the simple version first, and it seems to have solved the need without needing to go down the label route in that case.
Yeah, thanks actually for bringing that up, Sean. And have you had any new requests in addition to having a single? So this is basically peers, right? Peers for services, and you don't select it as a part of subject, right? Subject is still pods.
Yes, exactly. I think I didn't implement it. I think Casey, who you guys know, I think he implemented it, and if I remember correctly, we support it in the peers for both ingress and egress, which is a little bit odd. It makes a lot of sense for egress, and I think in the egress case, we limit the egress to the specific ports of the service. The slightly more kind of what's the right word? Well, the other one is a little bit more kind of speculative. We implemented the ingress peer as well, and we just said all of the pods that back a service are that service. So it's kind of a shorthand for reusing the selector that is attached to the service to pick out the backing pods. I think it's a nice quality of life feature, but I don't know if people are using that feature in Anger. I know that the egress service, people were asking for that, and I think it's a really nice quality of life feature there. The ingress one we kind of implemented for symmetry, just to kind of give it a nice way where you could up level your thinking and just think about the services and use that to name your endpoints. But I don't have any feedback particularly on whether that was a good idea or whether people are using that or not.
Nadia, you have a question?
I just wanted to say that that's a really nice feedback. We did discuss already a little bit about using a label selector and if that's required, and that makes implementations more heavy. So that sounds like a good feedback for us to consider.
I think the discussion was literally Casey said, yeah, it'll take me twice as long to implement if we do labels, and I can't really see any great reason for it. So why don't we do this first, see if it scratches the itch? And it seemed to. So yeah, it was very much that heavier implementation and no real need.
Yeah, and I think since it's a list of peers, you can anyways put multiple service names, right? So you can still express what you want.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but this is a great feedback, Sean. And I think for sure Nadia, you had started discussion around this a few weeks ago, and we wanted to talk about it at KubeCon, but didn't get a chance. So there is an issue that Nadia had opened, which is, let me try to pull up a link to it. And we can try to capture the feedback from Calico there as well, so that it stays somewhere on GitHub.
Sure, yeah, just point me at it. and I'll add that in.
It's in the agenda just at the beginning of that bullet point where you left a comment.
Oh.
And that issue has two parts to that. Just adding services is one of them, and then actually defining how we treat services. For now, it's just exactly as backend pods, but the question is if that's the correct way. So there are two parts to that. Oh, and comments are welcome on any of those.
Yeah, we considered a few implementations. Calico has the capability to do policy pre-DNAT, so we could have done it based on like service IPs. I think we went back and forth on that quite a bit, and I forget the arguments now, but yeah, there were different ways to implement it for sure, but that one seemed to work out quite nicely and quite intuitively, I think.
Yeah, that's great feedback, Sean. Again, thanks for bringing this up. And what should be the next steps here for driving this forward? If anybody is interested in doing an NPEP to capture this, that's awesome. But if not, for now, let's also try to capture it up in the issue and see how we can move forward with that. Any questions for Sean on this topic before we move to our very cool tenancy? Okay, if not, next up's tenancy ANP, BANP. I think that's also from you, Sean, right? Or was it Nadia? I don't see a name on that item.
I think we discussed on, I put the entry in there, but I think we were saying on Slack that we wanted to discuss some of the feedback in the meeting.
Is that about, it's actually comments on the NPEP, right? About if we have two different objects or one object, right?
I think that was one of the things. So I put the heading there, and I put my name under one of the comments where I was just I was curious if folks feel like ANP and BANP are sort of ready to implement. We actually teed up someone to work on implementing those in Calico. And then I went to KubeCon, and by the time I got back from KubeCon, the same and not same labels had been removed and tenancy was on the table. And so like, it feels like it's still very much in flux. And I was just wondering, is ANP and BANP like settled now? The same and not same labels is taken out of it. Is anyone still like pushing for that to be different? So just, we're wanting to get on with our implementation there and put something out, but if it's still in flux, then maybe we should be more prototyping and feeding into the design process instead.
I think from the tenancy point of view, we removed same not same labels from ANP and BNP and agreed that we will not add anything like that back. So that was exactly to make ANP and BNP more stable. And then tenancy is what is still in progress and can change. And we actually intended to move ANP and BNP to beta at some point, right?
Yeah. Yeah, so I think the ANP and BNP CRDs as in the current state, we want to get the FQDN peer in as the inline which we talked about. And we want to do tenancy as well before beta, but that is going to be a separate CRD. We've gone back and forth and finally decided it won't be a part of the main one for sure. So how the new CRD looks like is still up for grabs. Well, more or less we have it brought down to a few options, but I think tenancy and FQDN are the two remaining items for us to go to beta at this stage. And which means except for the FQDN peer that's coming up, like rest of the things are pretty much stable on the main CRDs. And if it makes one reference point I could give is in Obian Kubernetes and in OpenShift, we are GAing it with that CRD. I don't know if that makes it feel better in terms of stability, but we did the 0.1.3 tag last week. So we've been trying to digest the tags instead so that we don't get issues with backwards compatibility and won't break ourselves. So for now, we plan to stick to that tag. And then if the next tag does not have any breaking changes, then we will upgrade to that. So on and so forth.
Okay. And the current spec for AMP, BAMP, they don't have the complicated thing in the self and same and
Yeah.
not same. So I think we can implement those quite straightforwardly in Calico. They map relatively straightforwardly onto what we already have. I think there was a bit of eyebrow raising about having tenancy as a separate thing on our team. Just it just adds another thing that people have to keep track of, and another thing that has to be presented in the user interface and the CLI and all these other things, but it interacts with your policy in another way. So I think our instinct was against it, but then I've been trying to follow on with all of the threads, and I think there are some good reasons behind it as well. So I was kind of holding that feedback back a little bit, just to make sure I was up to speed.
Yeah, so I think everyone had that moment as we were discussing it, where should it really be another CRD, or especially because sometimes, especially with regards to priority, because we already have AMP, NP, and BANP at specific levels. Now with the new CRD, we need to see where this fits in, right? So with regards to that, we do have concerns, but I think all the user stories are pretty much nicely outlined in that NPEP, and then the consensus was based on how do we satisfy all of that without opening up more holes, which was the problem with same and not same labels. And Dan, I see you have your hand raised for a long time. Go for it.
I just wanted to clarify that when Surya said we are GAing the 0, 1, 3 or whatever API, we are GAing it as an alpha API, fully understanding that it is possible that this means that in the future we will have to simultaneously support the V1 alpha 1 API and some further alpha 2 or beta or GA admin network policy API, which are not entirely compatible. So we are not trying to hold back the evolution of AMP at all with that.
Yeah, +1. So this is very much, in fact, we actually wanted to do beta before the EuroCubeCon, and we have not done that. We still want to keep the influx of features and things going in. So if there are ideas and perhaps like, the service one that you mentioned, we should be doing it now for sure. So there's basically nothing stopping us from breaking things at the current stage. But having said that, we are also planning on our side to make sure we protect ourselves from it downstream, which means we might have to have some kind of conversion mechanism, worst case. And I think to answer your original question, which was, is it stable or not for Calico to implement it currently? Right. As of now, the only pieces that I'm aware of are FQDN and tenancy, right?
Yeah.
Which are in
Is
progress.
FQDN going to be a core part? I mean, our DNS policy has ended up in our enterprise product, so we could be in the awkward position of only supporting the full thing in our enterprise version. So that feels like something that we should address, whether every implementation has to support DNS policy.
I think we were pretty firmly convinced it should be in the extended support category, so no one has to support it to be compliant. I'm not aware of anything that's changed since then, right? Like I think the API spec, as I've proposed it right now, it says support is extended, and I think we'll make sure that carries through.
Sounds good to me. Obviously, there's the possibility we'd open source it to be compliant, but that's a separate decision. So it's good to have it as extended for us.
Nadia?
Yeah, so there is the discuss feedback on tenancy point in that list. Do you want to discuss some specific one? I think we had a couple of different threads.
So I think one question I had that I was finding it hard to find in the doc was about priority, because I think there was like a long thread, maybe with Dan, about priority and kind of the tenancy object being sort of split so that the allow portion of it is at the start of your ANP and or at the end, and the deny is at the top, or I can't remember exactly how it was structured, but I'm not sure that made it into the final doc. So I think what's in there at the moment is that the tenancy policy is kind of higher priority than all of your ANP if it's an ANP tenancy policy. And I just saw that kind of undermines some of the other use cases and requirements, if that is the case. And that was what I kind of wanted to ask, because it looked like that had gone through a few revisions. I thought that
Yeah.
undermined the idea that the admin can set policy that like overrides the namespace policy. So there's specific examples of like, I want to always allow traffic to this particular thing, and I want to stop people from shooting themselves in the foot by putting in this high priority policy. But if you have your tenancy policy be even higher priority, then you can't override that tenancy policy. So you kind of get stuck with being only able to defer to the namespace policy, and then your users can shoot themselves in the foot in some other way. And do you get what I mean?
Yeah, this specific part is not really covered. I think we did discuss that at some point. So we first tried to figure out if we need an allow and pass skip. I have these two words mixed up in my mind. The basically allow and pass action for tenancy, but then we kind of decided that there is no reason for admin to strictly allow traffic within the same tenant, and that it kind of makes more sense to let the namespace network policies decide that.
Yep.
Yeah, but if you have an idea about when it would make sense, right? We did have this discussion about like force the users of the cluster and to not shoot themselves in the foot, right? As you said, but then we were not sure if that makes sense in the real world.
So I think my reading of the current spec is that if you have your two options, you can either pass or you can deny not same. Is that right? And they
okay. Yeah, a little note on the stability of that one, right? The more or less firm decision we got is just that the priorities should be implicit, meaning they are injected in between existing ANPs and BNPs and everything. And then where exactly they go, as you said, right? The highest priority, lowest priority around ANP, BNP, that is still kind of work in progress. So what you see currently in the NPAP is more of a suggestion, and we have not gone into too many discussions around that. So that's basically where we are right now, and that's the main topic of discussion, I would say, at this stage.
Yeah, I think that was the thing that I think as I read the doc at the point it sounded wrong to me, because it sounded like you put the admin in a position where the admin can't do something that the namespace policy owner can do. And I felt like the admin should always be able to like put their foot down and say, I want to block this, I want to allow this. I don't care what the tenancy or whatever else would normally do. I have specific reasons to allow the Pepsi Coke merger team, who are top secret, to talk to each other, even though Pepsi and Coke are not normally allowed to talk to each other, for example.
Yeah, well, so let's, I think, have this discussion in the NPAP again, because it's not obvious if it makes sense, right? Because admin is who creates the tenancy itself also, right? So admin, like when he uses skip for tenancy, he kind of explicitly delegates this decision to the namespace owners, and then saying, oh no, I actually want to override my own policy for tenancy. I'm not sure if there is a proper user story for that. I mean, yeah. again, it comes down to like always allowing something, or maybe the admin actually should exclude these two namespaces from the tenancy at all, right? And then have a separate ANP for them, maybe.
Isn't almost all our user stories centered around multi-tenant isolation?
Two of them, yes, and then two or some more. We have 4 user stories. 2 of them are mostly about isolation, and then the other one is actually more around like current network policy, kind of zero trust thing, when you want to deny everything except whatever you want to allow, and then in that case you actually want to explicitly allow tenants.
I think I was going back to the user stories for admin network policy, as opposed to the sort of tenancy specific aspects of it. Just things like I want to allow everyone to talk to DNS. I want to allow monitoring to reach into any tenant. And I guess what you're saying is, well, one option is you could just not set your monitoring namespace as being a tenant namespace. So you have this kind of this separation between tenanted namespaces and like non-tenancy namespaces, and then your admin's allowed to write policy for the non-tenancy namespaces, but if they've written a tenancy policy, the admin can't write anything else about the tenants. They can't override anything. It just feels to me like some kind of weird inversion where I'm the admin and I've said I want to write a policy and I can't do it.
Yeah, I know that feels strange. But there is a specific use case, I guess, very similar to what you're describing. And that goes down to having like 2 kind of modes for tenancy. One is like allow same tenant, and another one is deny not same tenant, which sound very similar, but are not exactly the same. So in the case where you want to have extra like cross-tenant allow rules, right? Like allow from monitoring, allow from DNS everywhere. What you are expected to do is to have allow same tenant tenancy, then all the extra allow rules between tenants, and then a big deny all for all namespaces on top of that as ANP. If that makes sense. So what your tenancy does is that is more of this model, right? Deny all except. So you say I deny all except the same tenant is always allowed to talk to the namespaces. Yeah.
I think the weird thing is like I would expect. So if I was only going to have one priority available, I would expect the tenancy to be the thing that comes at the end of the ANP, so that I can do any exception that I please, because I'm an admin and I want to say this can talk to this, and I don't care who designed the tenancy model or what they were thinking. I want this pod to be able to talk to this pod, and then at the end of it all, apply the tenancy policy, which says pass, pass if it's the same tenant, and then the namespaced policy owners can have their say about what they want to allow within their namespace after my ANP has already like forcibly allowed or forcibly denied whatever I want. So it seemed odd to have the tenancy. If the tenancy is going to do a skip, I don't want it to skip my admin rules. I want the power of being an admin to be able to do whatever it is that I want to do in my organization. And then the tenancy sets my kind of baseline of, do I want to defer things? Do I want to forcibly allow everything within a tenant, or defer things to the namespace owner? Or do I want to leave it all up to the baseline policy at the very end and let the namespace owners control it? That felt like the natural way to do it to me, and I sort of it felt quite wrong to have the tenancy be higher priority than the ANP. Like given the other goals of ANP to just like allow the admin to lay down whatever it is the policy is for their organization.
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I think we can discuss that further offline, but generally speaking, the priority that makes sense for tenancy changes whether you think about it in terms of like allow same tenant or deny not same tenant, as I mentioned before. And I probably should expand and Pep on that. I'll try to explain why they work differently with these priorities.
Yeah, I think I wasn't quite sure on exactly what you were proposing in there, and maybe it was still in flux, and that's why it wasn't obvious. But there was loads of discussion, and I wasn't quite sure where it had settled. So yeah, let's take it offline.
Yeah, sure. I think you got what I tried to explain, but you just didn't get why, because I probably didn't explain it well enough. So I'll try to fix that.
Yeah, thanks again, Sean, for bringing all that discussion up again. I think we have tried to put, like Nadia said, most of the discussions that happen in the meetings onto the NPEP, so it's reiterating and rehashing it probably at this point. And I know we are a little bit almost at time, so I'm gonna quickly jump over to the next items of the agenda, if that's okay with everybody. Nadia, you had a question which Dan has already answered, but was there anything else you wanted to add to that?
No, we discussed that as a part of FQDN topic.
Yep, cool. And Hunter, over to you. You had 2 topics here.
Yeah, I'll be super quick because we're already at 10. But yeah, I guess yeah, firstly, I haven't seen anyone since KubeCon. I think met most of the quorum here, so it was fun meeting y'all. But I guess maybe next time I can talk about policy assistant. Basically, we got some good feedback. I'm sure Surya might have talked about it last meeting. And I'm just thinking, I'm meeting with people from Gateway API today to maybe see how they're doing things, or how we can collaborate. And then I did put on the agenda something mentioning you, Nathan. So I guess I feel like I should bring that up if I've been holding you. But basically, I was just looking to throw my hat in the ring, implementing the admin network policy for Cilium. Just thought it'd be interesting to help. I've worked for context, worked like the past year with Cilium's code base, with like the Retina network observability product that's been announced recently. So, and then before that, I was working on Azure's network policy manager for I guess 2 years, kind of the lead dev there. So yeah, would be really excited to help out there and just like talk to you about like how I can be a help. And yeah.
Sure, yeah. I am actually the assigned team member to be looking at that. So I am wrapping up port ranges right now for Cilium, and as soon as that's done, I plan to tackle looking at ANP and how we want to deal with it. And yeah, I'm happy to fold you in if you want to be a part of that work.
Yeah.
Hit me up on OSS Cilium Slack
Yeah.
to get going.
Sounds good. Yeah, and I know there's I know I'm gonna have a bit of a knowledge gap. Been trying to read the code, get used to everything, but
the policy engine in Cilium is very complicated. It touches 3-4 important systems at the same time.
yeah, so very critical piece, right?
Yes, at very low level.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'll hit you up on Cilium OSS.
Cool.
Thanks, Nathan.
Of course.
Thank
That's
you,
all from me.
Helping with, yeah, thank you for volunteering to help here with the implementations. And that's all the items of the agenda. We are 3 minutes over time. I don't want to hold anybody back, but does anybody have any last minute things they want to bring up? If not, thank you all for joining. Have a great rest of the week.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks all.
Bye, everyone.